Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Israel, Palestine, and the U.S. Much has transpired since the second Obama term began, and in terms of Middle East politics and the relationship of the U.S. to the Middle East, one of which was the Gaza attack by the Israelis on November 14th, 2012. And it lasted for a week, and that wasn't the first Gaza attack by the Israelis. The first one was on 27 December 2008 and lasted till 18 January 2009. So the Gazans have been subjected to a lot of attacks by the Israelis, even between these two major conflagrations between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Gaza. We have with us this evening Raji Abuzalaf. Thank you for coming. He's a peace activist and he's of Palestinian origin. And I would like to ask you, Raji, to say more about yourself, and then we can start with the question of background about Israel in terms of the state of Israel and its existence on Palestinian land, and then we can take it from there.
Thanks, Ibrahim, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. As far as tell you about myself, I'm a resident of Hawaii. I've been here about 20 years, and I guess my life is kind of in thirds. I spent about 20 years or a little more than on that in the mainland, and I was born in the Middle East. I'm a Palestinian, but because my parents were kicked out of Palestine, I was born in Kuwait, and I've lived in Kuwait and in Beirut, Lebanon, and Saudi and North Africa, in the Arab countries there, for many years of my life as well. And I guess you called me a peace activist because I believe, we're here on earth to find a way to have peace with our neighbors, all of our neighbors. And we're not doing that great of a job as humanity goes, but we can still keep after it and keep finding ways to talk about peace and keep peace as the foremost subject in our hearts.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And so in terms of if you would give us some background about the existence of the State of Israel in Palestine, actually on Palestinian land, and what are some of the myths that, the Israeli narrative of creation and the Israeli narrative of existence talks about and tries to propagate?
Okay, that's kind of a deep question. It's a very heavy question, but I'll do my best. As far as talking about the existence of Israel and the conflict that's there are a bunch of myths, and I think that's a good way to approach it. Maybe we can talk about some of the fallacies and present in opposition some of the facts, and then maybe comment on them, and you can ask me or stop me on the way. First, let me talk about some of the fallacies, and I kind of bulleted some of them, and we'll just go through them. It says, and we hear it a lot, Palestinians are an invented people, and we hear a lot of American politicians saying that. And the fact is, Palestine has had the name of Palestine since 500 BC, that's 2,500 years ago, and all of the inhabitants of the region have been called Palestinians, and that includes Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and of course they came along in different time periods. So it's not an invented people, it's been there 2,500 years, but thanks to the media, these fallacies are what's in the West more common knowledge than the actual facts behind. Another myth, we always hear that Israel is the only and true democracy in the Middle East. I would like to say at this point, and it's not me saying it, Israel is a Zionist state, and some people don't even know what the word Zionist or Zionism means, so we always encourage people to go just look it up on the internet. Thank God for the internet, you can get a lot of information there. But by definition, Zionist is kind of based on a racist ideology, and politically speaking, they're also a fascist ideology, and so by definition, how can you mix the two? How can you say we're a Zionist state and then at the same time declare yourself as a democracy? So you can hold elections and say, oh, we're a democracy because we have elections, but just holding elections doesn't make a country democratic in nature.
Yeah, so let me stop you here and ask you, why would you say Zionism is a fascist ideology and Israel is a fascist state?
That's a very, I mean, it's hard to explain in just a few moments, but just a quick answer would be Zionism originally began as an ideology to find a national homeland for the Jewish people. And as it matured and evolved into a political movement, which was back in 1897 and into the early 1900s and through today, the major goal of Zionism is to have a Jewish state. And of course, one was envisioned and conceived and in fact became a reality in 1948 after World War II, thanks to the United Nations and much lobbying from the Zionists. So to have a Jewish state means, you know, whoever is living in that state, if you're not Jewish, then, you know, what is your status? Mm-hmm. And so by definition, you're a second-class or a third-class citizen. So that's why I'm saying that it's a, you know, racist, if you will, because, you know, most Jews would consider themselves, you know, part of a race and their own race.
Yeah.
And on the political end, they are justifying having that Jewish state by any kind of aggression and taking of land in any way, fashion, or form. And so that goes along with the fascist regimes of old, and, you know, so that's my answer to you.
Yeah, and Lenny Brenner, who's a Jewish writer, a Jewish intellectual, he had written a book a while back called Zionism in the Age of the Dictators, and he had exposed through like archival materials the relationship of the Zionist movement with fascist regimes, not only like the Nazi regime in Nazi Germany, but also fascist Italy, Pilsudski, the dictator, the military dictator in Poland, and other dictators in Europe. So this is well documented that Zionism has also collaborated with Nazis. They don't like to say that. They try to keep that those facts from their own narrative that they would like to propagate on the people, that narrative that is based on myths. The other one is the creation of the State of Israel itself, in terms of how it was created through the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, according to Ilan Pappe, and in his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine of 2006. But also these kinds of ethnic cleansing operations have been known by the Palestinians for a long time to come. For a long time, and that particular narrative was not given the day of light, at least in the West. So what would you say about those things, and what your experiences have been in your peace activities in that on that trajectory?
Well, you mentioned Ilan Pappe, and I think it's important to note that he's an Israeli.
Yes.
But he's a very well-educated and well-spoken Israeli, and he's written many books on the subject of Israeli aggression and also its basis on Zionism. So as far as Ilan Pappe and other authors and other people, I'd like to also mention Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. I think many people, most people in the world, recognize him as one of the most brilliant individuals that ever lived. He was a Jew. And they, of course, when they were forming Israel, they offered him to be the first prime minister.
President.
And so he refused, but not only did he refuse, he wrote a letter, and in his letter, and we encourage, once again, don't take my word for it, we encourage viewers to go on and just, you can Google Einstein, Zionism, Israel, and you can read in his letter that he equated Israel and the Zionist state of Israel with the Nazi regimes and with fascism. And so he actually declared it, and he would not have anything to do with it. So as far as the ethnic cleansing that Ilan Pappe talks about, I mean, the specifics of it are 800,000 Palestinians were forced to leave their land. We can talk about pointing fingers as, to the United Nations and not having thought through a decision to give those lands and say, yes, this partition that we're going to lay on the historic Palestine, and we're going to give this portion of the land to Israel and this portion to Palestine, but nobody thought it through. So what are you going to do about the inhabitants, the indigenous inhabitants of the land? But what happened was, since nobody thought it through, the Zionists, the Eastern Europeans that infiltrated, came in and made the decision on their own, and we'll just kick them out. And in order to do that, they destroyed 500 villages. And I would call that, ethnic cleansing.
Right.
And so if you weren't a Jew, that is, if you were Muslim or, Christian, you were either dispelled from your land or your village was razed and you were forced to fight. And so, of course, this is what caused the huge refugee population that still till today remains living in poverty and ghetto-like conditions. So I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah, that's true. Also, like in terms of narratives, which are very important, those narratives, the Israeli narrative, the Palestinian narrative, right after the invasion, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, and Israel occupied Beirut and surrounded Beirut and occupied certain areas of it. Edward Said, the Palestinian intellectual, had written a piece. Actually, it came out in the New York Review of Books at one point, and he titled it "Permission to Narrate." And that was an important piece in the sense that how narratives are very important in propagating ideas, and how the Zionist idea, the narratives, American narratives in support of Zionism as well, have dominated the airwaves and all kinds of media. And Said also accuses the West, and especially the US and Israeli influence in terms of lobbying in the United States and other Western countries. He accuses them of really revoking, and this is his term, revoking the right to narrate the Palestinian narrative by Palestinians. And so it shows you how like firepower really and domination over media can prevent you or prohibit you from narrating your own existence and your own narrative in the Western media. And therefore, the people in the West would be only getting one side of the story and not any other side. Thank goodness, again, as you mentioned, to the internet and other kinds of efforts by Palestinians and justice-loving people all over the world, there have been some cracks in that domination of narratives by the West and the Zionists, and in terms of cracks also in preventing the Palestinians from narrating their own narrative and narrating their own existence.
I mean, this type of program that, like you and I are involved in now, I mean, there's many programs like that, and we'll give some kudos to stations like Link TV and Free Speech TV and programs like Democracy Now! And there's a lot of people out there trying to get the message out, the real other side.
And you have also a program.
Well, we're also fortunate to have a program on Olela, which is called Holy Land Peace. And so there's a bunch of programs out there like that. But I think the sad story is it's still a very small minority of Americans that, are watching those programs. Most people watch the, mainstream media, the NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox networks, CNN, those kind of networks. And as you said, those airwaves are in fact, controlled and so, continue on with, other fallacies. When you watch CNN or you watch even like the main movie stations, what you're going to get is you're going to get another fallacy that says Palestinians are terrorists. And, I think if the British owned the airwaves back in the 1700s, it would have said, the colonialists were terrorists. But what they were doing was fighting for their freedom and fighting off the true colonialists of the world, which were the British at the time. And so the truth about terrorism is that state terrorism is even worse. And I believe we have to also look within our own country, the United States, and as well as Israel, to see that they're guilty of state terrorism. And when we talk about terrorism, we're talking about, killing civilians, killing innocent women and children, old men. And Israel is very good at this, very adept at this, bombing civilians, biological warfare and chemical warfare on civilians. The siege on Gaza, as you mentioned, for how many years now? This is 5 years where this has been an unacceptable siege, and not allowing, in fact, not only do I not allow the Red Cross in, any peace organizations or UN funded and UN supported, like the Peace Flotilla of 2010 and 2011 and 2012, and now this year they're going to try to do something else. These were attacked and people were murdered by the Israelis. So, and for years and years, Israel just has attacked Lebanon and Syria, Iraq, even in Tunisia, they've made attacks over the years. And of course, the United States finds excuses to, infiltrate in Afghanistan and Iraq and those places. So I think when we look at terrorism, we need to, since we don't see that true side, the other side on the mainstream media, we need to look to other news sources to find out who the real terrorist is.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to mention one other, fallacy, and then if you want, you can question me on it. It's kind of common knowledge that in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Israel is the victim and needs international support to fight off the bad guys, the Palestinians. But the truth is that Israel has illegally occupied the Palestinian territories for 65 years now. And that's a fact, and it's not just me saying it. The United Nations, please look it up on UN.org. How many times have they perennially put out condemnations via United Nations Security Council and the main council, the General Assembly resolutions, and condemning Israel for its illegal occupation? And this is what we call the Palestinian territories, would be Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem. So all of these UN resolutions condemning Israel, but they've completely been ignored. And the truth is, if somebody is occupying your land illegally, you have every right to resist such an occupation. And therefore, you're not a terrorist. What you are is you're a resistor. You're in a resistance. Just like in the old days when we watched the movies about the Nazis and the French resistance and the North African resistance and the Polish resistance. And those were good things. Those were good guys because the book has been written by the ones who won the war, so we can call them resistance and heroes, freedom fighters. And that's what's going on today, but because we don't get the true news.
Yeah.
So if you want, we can even talk about the recent history of the resistance, and what the so-called peace treaties and all this other thing. But that's kind of my idea of the fallacies of what the media shows. And
yeah, that's very good as background. And then we would like to now talk about, since Obama got elected or re-elected, well, what has happened, especially now? Well, we talked about the Gaza attack of November 14th. I just mentioned it. But also in terms of the Israeli elections that had just happened a while back. So I'd like to go to an interview I did with Nicole Grove. She's a PhD student in political science at Johns Hopkins University. And I asked her to talk about the Israeli elections. It's a short clip, so we will do that, and then we can comment on that, since I know you have also things to say about the Israeli elections.
Well, I think in terms of the ongoing occupation, I'm not sure that the elections are really going to have that much of an effect. I think that the recent elections, there's been a lot of talk about how this has kind of been like a middle-class revolt in Israel and that this is kind of the new norm. And so I think that the mistake would be to equate sort of a move toward the center-left with a move toward more of an interest in the peace process.
Yeah, so this is an interesting perspective on the elections. I also, before we go and discuss things, I would like to go to another segment in which I interviewed Null Kent. He's a professor at the Department of Ethnic Studies here at the University of Hawai'i, Mānoa. And in light of what we had talked about, the creation of Israel and so forth, and the myths and the realities of the matter, he's talking about Israel's survivability in this context and what's happening in the Middle East at this point.
I think just in the larger context, it's part of just the complete bankruptcy of Israeli foreign policy, their inability to seriously approach some kind of negotiations that will establish either a Palestinian state or else incorporate Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza into a Israel, which will no longer be a Jewish state, but that is the only option that they may have if they want to survive as a real state. I mean, I think at some level, people do not appreciate the fact that Israel's survivability may be at stake in the next few years, not in the traditional way of, but of the Arabs, Palestinians pushing them into the sea, but in the sense that the Israeli societies are beginning to implode under the pressures between the Orthodox and the secular, between young people and old people. In the election, you see Bibi Netanyahu lost a considerable amount of his authority. Many people in Israel are extremely tired of this ongoing confrontation, which has gone on forever, since 1948 or before, and they want some degree of normalcy, and I think this showed up at the polls.
Yeah, normalcy in Israel is kind of like a mismatch between Israel and what is normal. So any comments on what Nicole has mentioned and what Noel has mentioned?
To the first interview, I would agree that not much has changed and not much will be affected by the elections. Of course, Netanyahu did win. The surprise to him was that he won by a way small, margin.
Yeah.
Of course, he belongs to the Likud party, the other party, which was supposed to be the new Israel, the more contemporary, that's called the Yesh Atid party. What they did was they gained parliament seats, and so he's going to have, just like if you have a Democratic president with a Republican Congress, or vice versa, Republican president with a Democratic Congress, you're going to have issues there, coming to agreements on passing laws and getting things done. That's the major thing. But I think it is a consensus that, all in all, with all of the issues going on in Israel, and I think many of them, like in the whole world, are kind of centered upon economy, the economics of how bad the economy is and things like that. But the real major issue, which is the dealing with the Palestinians, the ones that live in Israel, and of course the Palestinian territories, nothing's going to change there. Nothing much has changed. That's been put on like the back burner, and so we're going to just expect more of the same. As far as Mr. Kent, is it? His comments, very astute. I believe that survivability. He said something about it cannot just remain a Jewish state. I mean, it is a Zionist state at this moment. And by definition, that's an apartheid situation, where if you're not a Jew, you're a second or third class citizen. And I can attest to that personally, because there's a small village in Galilee, which, I'm of the Abuzalaf family, and we have hundreds of Abuzalaf living there, and they're treated very badly. They're discriminated against. They have very few rights, governmentally speaking, et cetera. And so if you want to survive and continue calling yourself a democracy and look at yourself in the mirror, you're going to have to maybe change the definition of the state of Israel. So that could lead to the true solution of having one, country, whether you call it Pal-Israel or Palestine-Israel, Israel-Palestine, or keep the name doesn't really matter. The idea is, if we're going to have a true democracy, people living in harmony, people living in peace, actual elections, just like in the United States, we had to face up to our discrimination against the blacks and then, against other minorities. And it was very painful, but we had to do it in the 60s. So Israel may have to go through this depending on who, wins out in making the decisions. Now, the reality is that Israel's government is a military government, and it's basically run by the military. And to prove that, one of the first actions that occurred as soon as the elections were over, Israel goes and bombs Syria and bombs a nuclear research facility. So I don't know what your reaction to that is, but that's kind of proof in the pudding that, hey, we just had our elections, and we're just going to show you what we're still about. We're military, we're stronger than our neighbors, and we're going to flex our muscles and break the international law, and no one's going to do anything about it.
And then actually this is one reason why Null Kent mentioned that it's a question of survivability of the state of Israel, and that Israeli politics as bankrupt, and then Netanyahu using the bombing of the Syrian facility as something to say, well, I'm tough guy, and has something to do with the Israeli formation of a new cabinet, etc. That's one reason. But I think the other larger reason is because Israel cannot survive but on wars. That's the raison d'etre of Israel. Wars of expansion. And anyone that the Zionists might think that is threatening their existence, like, the existence, for instance, of a strong Syrian army, and part of the resistance to the U.S.-Israeli project in the area, you have Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, and the Palestinian resistance, and some resistance also in Iraq itself. So they had to destroy this, and this is one reason why the Israelis have bombed the Syrian facility. So, I mean, there are a number of reasons why. So these are a couple of main reasons.
I think Israel's line, and if you read it in the media, is, well, we attacked Syria and we attacked this facility because we want to show, Syria that we're afraid Hezbollah is going to, or Syria, sorry, the government of Syria is going to give Hezbollah their, support, and they're going to give them money or give them other, support. And the irony of this is, I mean, we're watching, we being the United States is watching Israel doing this, when meanwhile, the United States has given hundreds of millions of dollars to the insurgents, whatever you want to call them, inside of Syria to help destroy that, the Syrian, existing government. So it's okay. That's like, what do you call that? Hypocrisy. It's okay for Western companies to intervene or interfere and give monies to, whoever. And we've been doing this for years, in Nicaragua, in Philippines, and, all over the world. We, we choose our puppets and we give monies and support one side. But then for someone else to do it, no, you can't do it. And by the way, we show you can't do it by bombing, a research facility.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting thing. And in terms of like terrorist states, Chief of Staff Dempsey recently, in hearings in the U.S. Congress, he admitted to, like, drones have been used and have killed a number of civilians, blah, 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 but that is not terrorism, as such. This is like collateral damage, but they keep doing collateral damage all the time. And sometimes they, apologize, and a number of times they don't apologize to the states, for instance, to Pakistan, as an example. Anyway, so I want to go in terms of this particular topic also to another segment with Nicole Grove, talking about what Israel would like to do in terms of maintaining the status quo as is happening right now.
There's definitely a desire to sort of maintain the status quo. The occupation wasn't really on the table in terms of the campaigning as much. People were really focused on social issues. They were really focused on economic issues, this exemption for Orthodox Jews in the military, and then also the increase in housing costs and things like that. And so I think that we really saw amongst Israelis who were sort of moved away from the right and the religious right in Netanyahu's camp. Not an apathy toward the situation, I think, but maybe just exhaustion. They're tired of the Arab Spring. They're tired of Iran. They really just want to kind of live their lives, and they want to focus on these other things because they feel that this other issue is not going to resolve itself, or it's not something that they want to think about. And so I think that I think what's interesting about that is that the building of the separation wall started about 10 years ago, and I think since then there actually has been a decrease in attacks in Israel and by Palestinians. And then the argument, right, that the argument usually goes that when we see a decrease in violence, that's when we start giving concessions, when we start talking about peace. And actually, what we just talked about in terms of the elections and like wanting to sort of like maintain the way that it is right now, that's not what we're seeing. In fact, we're actually seeing the opposite. We just want to leave things the way that they are. And so I don't think that that's a tenable situation. I don't think that you can leave millions of people disenfranchised indefinitely without something happening.
Yeah, so they always, the Israelis have an excuse for not dealing with the Palestinians. One, they are all terrorists. One, there are no partners for having peace negotiations, and so forth. All excuses to continue to take over more land in the West Bank. And the West Bank actually includes East Jerusalem. By the way, I want to comment on this a little bit because we now start talking Israeli narrative just like creeps into our consciousness by saying Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. No, East Jerusalem is part of the West Bank, and we shouldn't make that kind of distinction between the two. So I just wanted to make that point. So anyway, what would you say about what Nicole has mentioned?
Other than to agree, I mean, not much as far as commentary. I would agree, with what she's saying. It brings on what she's saying brings on other questions and other comments. But as far as what she discussed, I would happily
I agree with that. Good. So now here we are in the second term, Obama's second term in the United States. And we will go to another segment by Null Kent. He's talking about Obama's foreign policy and, what's the relationship between the U.S., Israel, and the Palestinians, and in terms of foreign policy in the Middle East as such.
It basically represents the Obama foreign policy, at least vis-a-vis the Middle East, continues to be absolutely bankrupt. I mean, they will not put pressure on the Israelis to really negotiate in any valid way, and this is just they basically are giving Netanyahu and the Israeli security forces a blank check in terms of whatever they like to do. Whether it's they probably don't want them to hit the Iranians at this point. Obviously, this is a point of contention, but Syria is a fair target, or Lebanon, or any place else, and this is very dangerous. These people are getting huge amounts of our aid and our taxpayer money, and we should have some real control over what they do with that, these armaments and the ordnance and everything else that we give them, and we're not doing that. So I'm extremely not that it's unexpected. I've been disappointed in Obama's foreign policy for years, but I was hoping that with the new electoral cycle, he would be more vigorous, and he'd basically take some initiatives he hadn't done before. But this isn't happening. Now he's going to Israel, which basically is a. What does this tell you? What message does this send? The message is basically, we support you all the way. We're not hearing anything about dismantling the settlements, which is the first order of any kind of business. So Obama continues to be extremely disappointing in terms of the whole region.
Extremely disappointed, indeed. So what would you say? Comments?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit verbose on this. First, I think we need to put things in perspective. We always want to look at the current administration, and we always label it by the poor schlep that happens to be, sitting in office. So I want to make two comments to start and maybe elaborate a little bit. But one comment is, we say Obama, 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 but Obama is just a spokesman for the Democratic Party, and he's going to do what the party tells him. That's the bottom line. Regardless what he might feel personally and what he has promised before and what he wishes in his heart, and growing up in Hawaii and having aloha, background and aloha spirit or whatever, and everything that we can relate to him. as you know, locals here in Hawaii and as Americans, he's still going to do what the party is telling him. And the sad truth is both the Democratic parties and the Democratic and the Republican parties have long been sold out to Zionism and to the state of Israel. That's the truth. So whatever we see from there, it's just now we can just look at it and go, yeah, that fits, because the U.S. policy has basically been in line with Israeli policy. And, you know, you can scream from the top of the mountains. That's, you know, so those are the 2 points I'm going to make is we can look at Obama, but it's really the party that's making the decisions. And at the same time, I'm not blaming one party over the other because both parties might do it in slightly different ways. But as far as foreign policy goes, and as far as the Middle East goes, they've been doing pretty much the same thing. I think we can talk about what Noel said. He talked about the settlements, the illegal settlements. You know, that's a horrible, terrible breaking of international law. First of all, they're illegally occupying the land, but as we speak, they're destroying homes and, you know, leveling homes using, you know, Caterpillar, what do you call?
Bulldozers.
Bulldozers, and regardless, people in the house or not. And, you know, once that land's been cleared, they're free to do with it what they want. They've built a wall. Imagine building a wall here in Mānoa, and you can't leave Mānoa to go downtown, or you can't, you know, get out of the valley unless you go through some check. I mean, it's a miserable kind of existence that they've created, inhuman things that are, and unacceptable, internationally illegal, but they continue to do that. So we look at these things that are going on there, and we say, what does the U.S. have to say about this? The illegal settlements that he's talking about. Once the land has been cleared, then I start building, you know, a property, and then I import people in there, and now I arm them. These are settlers that are, you know, they're thugs basically, because they've been interviewed, and are you willing to live someplace? It's illegal. You're going to have resistance. Because the people there, that's their land, or it used to be their land, and you know, but meanwhile we'll arm you. They're not allowed to have arms, and you know, they live behind a wall anyway, and so this is the kinds of things that are going on. The U.S. The official policy of the United States is to, for years, support the United Nations resolution that Israel must not build settlements there. That's illegal. Must leave the lands that they illegally attacked and have been occupying since 1967. But even though we as a country officially support those resolutions, we, on the real decision making, the monies that we give, the billions of dollars per year that we give Israel, and then the carte blanche that we give them to, and the pat on the back, and the, you know, all of the things that we do that are glorifying Israel and meanwhile vilifying the Palestinians show our true nature. We can officially say, yes, you must get rid of the settlements, but then by not putting pressure, as Noel says, you know. So what's the real way to put pressure? What's the solution? It would have to be cut off the funding. If you're going to take away my billions of dollars per year, maybe then I'll listen to you. And the other thing is, in the United Nations, when everyone meets and Israel does something bad and everybody says, no, we need to condemn them, and the United States vetoes it because it's one of the 5 countries that has veto power. This is something that it pats Israel on the back when they do something bad, when they do something illegal, when they do something inhumane. So these kinds of things the United States needs to stop, and so that has not been the situation for years and years.
Yeah, that's wonderful. But don't you think that actually it's a two-way street in terms of U.S. and Israel? Yes, Israel has a lot of influence in United States politics, and you mentioned the Democratic Party and the Republicans and so forth. And there has been much written about the influence of the Israeli lobby, the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. In fact, there's this book by Mearsheimer and Walt talking about, it's called the Israel Lobby, and they have exposed that and worked and advocated against that particular situation, that U.S. policy needs to be independent of that and work for U.S. interests. Be that as it may, the fact of the matter, it seems to me that in the U.S. also gains from having Israel be in that region and creating a state. In fact, this is one of the main reasons why the U.S. has, in fact, supported the creation of the State of Israel and was the first to, recognize the state.
But let me
Like
stop
in the
you
first hour or so.
for
Yeah,
just a
go
minute.
ahead.
That's a very important statement you just made. Can I just repeat it?
Sure.
You said U.S. also benefits by having Israel there and some of the activities that Israel is involved in. But let's qualify that for our viewers. It's not that Americans, the average everyday American benefits, and that the United States in its welfare is benefiting. It's that certain interest groups and corporations and politicians are benefiting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when we say the U.S. is benefiting, it's not. Most Americans are not benefiting.
Yeah.
We're in fact we're paying for it out of our pockets.
Right.
We're paying for it with a bad reputation around the world. We're paying for it with a numbing of our conscience that we're supporting and funding, evil activities around the world. And so most Americans, in fact, are not,
benefiting from
It's
it. No,
only
I
the
mean,
interest
yeah.
groups and specific corporations and politicians that are benefiting.
Yeah, of course. So we're talking about in terms of foreign policy and what drives U.S. foreign policy and international relations. And of course, we're talking about state interest and what the state represents. It doesn't represent you and I who went to vote necessarily, but it represents those corporate interests and those imperial interests. In fact, Niall Ferguson, he talks bluntly about in his books, even like this book Colossus, about the empire, and also how the U.S. should not be shy about talking about itself as empire, because this particular empire is a good empire, unlike perhaps the Roman Empire or some other empire.
The other regimes of the past.
But the Roman Empire used to think it was the civilizing, the civilization that is trying to save the world, etc. But actually it was moving in terms of its own interests. So that was a good empire in the eyes of the Romans. And so we are a good empire in the eyes of Niall Ferguson and all those elite who want to civilize and make sure like people live happily ever after, drones or not. Yeah.
So, so back to the Obama position, that Noel spoke about. And once again, I would like to refer to it as the party position and not just blame, President Obama. But you mentioned drone. The administration has shown that they are pro-drone, they are pro-control, they are pro-corporation, and unfortunately, they are pro-deception too. They continue to keep important information away from true education, away from Americans, and only present information that on a need to know or we want you to know this basis. And that's a sad thing. And so when an administration does that, then it's kind of hard to have a confidence in it. That particular administration, the Obama administration, the first session, and I believe the second session is going to just be more of the same.
Yeah.
It has vilified Palestinians and it has glorified Israel, and along with Israel, unfortunately, Zionism.
Yeah.
And we've done things, little things like what has Obama accomplished? He has Noel mentioned, it's a bankrupt foreign policy. Well, he's managed to remove the troops, the majority of troops from Iraq, but yet he made some statement which still leaves our foothold there, saying that we have to have a residual force, and so it's like committing that we're always going to be there. We're never going to really leave, even though the Iraqis want.
He probably has about 15,000 troops, aside from the embassy personnel, and that is the largest embassy in the entire world. I don't know why they had to construct such a huge embassy, were it not for some other nefarious activities. Has nothing to do with democracy, etc. I want to go to Nicole, segment with Nicole about the settlement expansion. This would, in fact, corroborate what we have been saying and would add a bit to it.
I mean, I know that there was a real push for that from Netanyahu in sort of expanding that E1 settlement after what had happened at the UN and the Palestinians being granted statehood status. I think that if he were to form a coalition government with Lapid's party, which it looks like is probably going to happen, I think it's likely, at least for now, that settlement expansion might be put on hold. And so what will happen to it in the future, I'm not really sure. But I think for now, maybe that might kind of be put on the back burner for now.
Yeah, I want to connect this also with the other things happening in the Middle East and will be happening, especially like, Obama will be visiting the Middle East very soon. Israel, Jordan, I heard also, and probably a third state, probably another Arab state. Anyway, Null Kent's segment about the question of Syria, the Middle East, and the U.S.
It's dangerous. It's terribly dangerous. I mean, it may be spiraling out of control at this point. The Israelis have just launched this air assault on the Syrians. Syria seems to be coming apart. This has all kinds of ramifications, obviously, for Lebanon and for Turkey and other areas. I mean, the whole the Syrian thing. When we were afraid of what might happen in Libya, what might happen in Tunisia and other places, but the Syrian thing is presenting the most serious challenge to peace in the Middle East and to global peace also.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that, since we're talking about, like Obama likes always to say, oh, we want to relaunch the peace talks and all of that, I want to go to, and now we have like a new Secretary of State, etc. I want to go to a segment by Nicole talking about the renewing of peace talks and what the new Secretary of State has in mind.
That's what Kerry wants to do, and he's already talked about that, sort of renewing the peace talks, and he feels like that's his, or has said that that's sort of his primary agenda in the Middle East right now. And I think Lapid has also said that. And so I could see maybe there being some talks happening, but in terms of actual shifts in policy on the part of Israel and in terms of their policies toward the territories, again, I'm not really sure. It's a lot of lip service to like a two-state solution, but that's different from actually engaging in sort of policy change, right? And so I think that the Obama administration and the White House would really have to draw some serious red lines in order to make anything like that happen, or really to be able to have that on the table. And so I'm not really sure that they're willing to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Israel has always been very adept at talking for talking's sake, like negotiations, and then doing nothing, and while talking, grabbing more land in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. So, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, they learned well from the Nazi regime. The Zionist regime not only learned from the Nazi regime, they perfected the art of acquiring land for the fatherland, from your neighbors, and they also learned about using propaganda to only, and especially in the West, I'm sure they do that same thing within Israel, but in Western countries they run the media. They control what movies get issued and get shown, and they control what news gets dispersed, and so yes, that's their goal. I think it's been Israel's goal all along. Even by the end of World War I, that they would have all of historic Palestine and also portions of Syria and Lebanon and other areas. So it's always been their goal, and all of the talking and lip service, as Nicole called it, is it looks pretty and it sounds good. And meanwhile, under the cover, I'm still grabbing land and bringing in settlers and doing all the illegal things that we as a country, United States, is supporting and funding.
Right. In fact, it just occurred to me, like I remembered one video on YouTube talking about propaganda It's called Peace, Propaganda, and the Promised Land. It's a little bit old one, but it tells you exactly what has been going on in terms of US and Israeli propaganda against the Palestinians and so forth, and how they frame the question of Palestine and Israel and that kind of occupation. I want to go now to Null Kent's piece, which talks about racial mythologies in terms of the state of Israel, etc. And that also underscores what some of the stuff we have been talking about. So we'll go to Noels.
This saddens me. This really saddens me. It saddened me when I went to Israel years ago. It saddened me, and it still saddens me, the fact that Jews like myself, who have been victims of for hundreds of years of pogroms, of terrible atrocities, can't open their hearts and their empathy and their understanding to these sort of racial mythologies, and basically we should be at the forefront of helping to lead the world toward demolishing these myths and toward embracing all kinds of people from different cultures. Yeah. So when I see this, it really saddens me.
Yeah. This was also a response to a question I posed for him about, a comment I mentioned, that there was an Israeli soccer team, and two Chechens who are Muslim wanted to join the soccer team, and the Israeli fans revolted against that decision, showing how racist they are, because they didn't want to play with Muslims, and because Muslims are Arabs and Arabs are filthy and terrorists and all that kind of stuff. Although Chechens are not Arabs, but because they are Muslim,
It's
so
okay, we can lump them all in together.
Yeah, good. But I want to go to another thing that is actually important in terms of the Middle East, to expand it beyond the question of Israel-Palestine, but also Israel, Iran, and the US in terms of the nuclear project of the Iranians. So we'll go to that one.
I mean, if I was the Iranians, I would pursue an atomic, I mean, I'm not arguing that I favor that, but, given the raison d'etre, given the power relationships, given what the U.S. has done and what the Israelis have done in terms of sabotaging it, yeah, I mean, you really have to look at this and say, how does one defend, and I'm not interested in defending the Islamic Revolution in Iran, but if you're the Iranians, you're looking at the sense of national identity, national pride, national integrity, it seems that the only way you could defend it against the U.S. might be to build nuclear weapons, as horrendous as that seems. And that's our fault for basically pushing them into a situation where they feel that the only way they can survive is through nuclear weapons. I mean, the fact that really strikes you is here we have this immense arsenal of Israeli nuclear weapons, and nobody is talking about that. No one is saying, let's put that on the table as part of a negotiating chip. Let's have a nuclear-free, We talked about the nuclear-free Pacific here back in the 1980s, and you probably remember that. And, the French need to pull out, stop testing in the U.S. and this sort of thing. And some of that got done. Why not make that whole region a nuclear-free region? That would really diminish rivalries, and it would really reduce the prospect of any kind of very, very serious war.
It's rather interesting, but I want to go to one more segment of Noel talking about Egypt, and then we can talk about Iran, Egypt, Palestine, Israel all together. The one about U.S. objective in Egypt. What is the U.S. objective in Egypt, given that there is a Muslim brother who is now the president of Egypt, and presumably the Americans didn't like the Muslim brothers, but how come are they dealing with them at this point? Is it because Morsi became the president of Egypt, or what?
The U.S. was very content to have an autocratic dictator like Mubarak running Egypt for 3 decades. I think what the U.S. the primary U.S. objective in Egypt is stability, control. That there shan't be any Egyptian-Israeli into incursions or fighting. So, you know, I mean, once again, we prize stability over justice, democracy, or a fair redistribution of the world's goods, and that's a real tragedy. I think many people in Cairo greeted the U.S. as sort of a fellow traveler in terms of freedom and liberty at Al Tahrir Square, and now I think there's been a real loss of credibility.
Yeah, loss of credibility. So it's not only like Palestine Israeli conflict, but the larger Israeli Arab conflict, and in fact the Israeli Middle East conflict, if we bring Iran into the situation. So what does that tell us in terms of the U.S. interests, Israeli interests? Any comments, like, as a Palestinian, and how it might impact Palestinian?
How about if I answer it as a concerned American?
Well, you can answer it as a human being.
I mean, I'm very saddened as well. I'll use Noel's terms. So seeing my country, you know, with the high ideals that we have, and our history of defending the little guy, the underdog, and freedom and liberty and justice for all. But what we've come up with is more like what you've described, the Roman Empire earlier. It's just our interests alone. And not our interest means all of the American people, just those that seem to be running and influencing the decision-making of our government. And so all of the stuff that's going to go on in the Middle East, the lip service and, you know, whatever future events, it's going to be, until someone stops the madness, it's going to just be more of the same. Whatever corporations, whatever benefits them, you know, the arms dealers, the oil companies, the large corporations and the other special interest groups, those things are going to still happen to sadden me and sadden all of us. And our ideals are losing credibility even with ourselves, the ones who are true, conscientious Americans. So that's my comment on that as an American, as a human being.
Yeah. So what can be done to begin changing those kinds of things?
In a few seconds, how can I tell you that? I
Well,
mean, I can
you
say
have a
that,
minute. You have a minute,
I mean,
or less than a
America
minute.
needs to get its conscience back, and it needs to start here in America. I mean, that's, you know, and we need to get a conscience back again. We can't be the ones running around and the only ones who've ever used nuclear warfare to destroy hundreds of thousands of people and go pointing a finger at some country somewhere who has a nuclear research facility and saying, oh, and accusing them that they're going to use it for military purposes when maybe they're just doing it for, you know, energy purposes. But that's the kind of hypocrisy that needs to stop, and it can only happen when we have a conscience.
Yeah, and also, like, the Americans went into Libya, right? I mean, the first 2-3 days of the attempt to get rid of Gaddafi, the Americans sustained that attack, and then they dealt, they still helped through NATO to get rid of Gaddafi and create a problem in terms of Libya. And now Libya is chaotic, and now the chaos moved down to Mali, which is south of Algeria and Libya. And the chaos continues. And what have we gained in terms of that? Nothing but a problem of more imperial interests playing and wiping out countries and getting rid of people, killing people, oppressing them, etc. Well, we are flat out of time, so thank you for coming over and sharing some of your views with us. And for our viewers, thank you, mahalo nui loa, and we'll see you next month. Aloha.